I couldn't make a decision. I was a child. I wanted my mom to hold me in my arms and tell me what to do. And that did not happen. And I suffered in silence for a long time. So 2 months before my wedding, I found out I'm HIV positive. Everybody's who's listening, when you have this gut feeling, this something told me, you need to pay attention to it. It is so serious.
Welcome back to Season 5 of Confessions, HIV Positive Women. This season, we're diving into the experiences of women at different stages of life, all navigating the realities of living with HIV. You'll meet a young woman recently diagnosed at just 21 years old, as well as a lifelong survivor who has been living with HIV since birth. We'll also hear from women who are now facing the unique challenges of aging with HIV. Join us as we explore their journeys, resilience, and what it means to thrive at every stage of life.
My name is Alicia. I am originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I currently live in North Carolina. I was diagnosed with HIV in 2001, December 13, 2001. I was 29 years old when I was diagnosed with HIV. It has been 24 years now since I have been diagnosed, and I am thriving and living and loving my life. The best 3 words that describe me: absolutely beautiful, caring, and dedicated. So I grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I am the oldest girl of 4. My mother had 5 of us, so I had a big brother who passed away in 2015. There's myself. I have a set of twin sisters. They were born second, and then I have a younger sister. But growing up in Philadelphia, I will say I had a really good time. I was a very friendly kid, but I unfortunately grew up in a house of dysfunction, like so many people. My mother's second marriage was not the best for us. Unfortunately, I grew up in a home of domestic violence, so most of my childhood, that is what I saw. My big brother and I have the same mother and father. My sisters are from my mother's second marriage. During that time, my mother was married to this person. Like I said, it was a lot of abuse. Me being a darker skin complexion of all of my siblings, and growing up in that household, the stepfather was very mean. He did not physically abuse me, but it was emotional and it was verbal. We couldn't do things like laugh or play when he was around. He just didn't like it. I went through that with my mom from the age of 3 years old to 13. So it was 10 years that we dealt with that. So for me, being in a household like that, I spent a lot of time outside. That was what we did when I was growing up in the 70s, 80s. There was no internet and games and things like that. Going to school was like my getaway. Going to school was fun for me. Yes, I went through teasing like a bunch of other kids did. I did very well in school. I was the front of the class girl. I was shy, very shy, but the memories that a lot of my friends have that I grew up with, they remember me being this happy, smiling, and fun kid. They did not know what I was going through in the house. There were times that, when there was teasing, there was times that maybe we didn't have water, we didn't have electricity, because I'll just call him the evil stepdad, took the money and did whatever he wanted with it. Now, the home we lived in a predominantly Caucasian neighborhood. It was upper class. Across the street was a doctor. Down the street was the chief of police. We lived in a nice neighborhood, had a nice house. So the people on the outside assumed that we had it going on. But really, it was terror. It was hell on wheels in that house when that man was around. My mother, she did the very best that she could to show love, to play with us, to be fun. My mom was always loving. Mom was very popular. As for me, I grew up being this kid who was happy on the outside with my friends, but not on the inside. I was broken. I had low self-esteem. He always called me a black, ugly bee. And the horrible thing about it was, even though my mom would always tell me how beautiful I was, she loved on me, I didn't get in trouble. I was not the get in trouble girl at all. My mom showed me so much love, and in spite of that, I still held on to the negative words from the stepfather. I went through with low self-esteem. I could never kind of get out of that. I was not a promiscuous girl. I was actually afraid of boys and afraid of men because of being in a household of an abuser. Not only my mother being abused, but there were times that I rode with my mother to maybe a hospital, police station, to pick up a cousin, an auntie, a friend who was abused. Sometimes when you grow up in a home like that, the cycle doesn't change, but it changed for me. You tend to get into a relationship where someone either physically, emotionally, and mentally abuses you or verbally abuses you. For me, I didn't realize I was a fighter. So being in a relationship with anyone and maybe they raised their voice, that was a trigger for me. Or as if they were about to come after me, maybe want to fight. And not that I was a fighter, but I always felt like I had to be on the defense. This occurred for me as I got into my later teens, but in my early teens, I was very gullible when it came to guys because I was shy, I was very scared. I want to say I was about 12 years old that my first sexual experience, and it was my best friend's uncle, who at the time was about 19. He took advantage of me. He was not a fussy guy. He was very, very nice. He would buy me stuffed animals, which was one of my favorites. He would pick me up after school. He would get me food, and I'd have enough to share with my sisters when I got home. But he would also take me in a park and tell me, I got those things for you. Didn't you like them? Then you should do this thing for me. So his thing was oral sex. I would tell him I didn't want to do it. And then he would say, well, didn't you like the stuffed animal? Or didn't you like the food? Wasn't the food good? And don't I make you feel safe? And he just kind of manipulated me, if you will. I just, even in tears, I did whatever he wanted me to do. I cried through it. He didn't stop, and he would let me know, oh, it's going to be okay. I was afraid to tell my mom, not that I couldn't talk to her, but my assumption was that if I tell her and the stepdad finds out, he's going to beat my mom. Because my mother's abuse wasn't, they got into a big argument, things got out of control. My mom's abuse was the kids are laughing too loud. Mom cooked chicken and maybe he wanted spaghetti. Mom wore shorts and he didn't want her to. Because my mom was very tall, she was a model, she had long pretty hair, she was just this beauty queen. And he beat that out of my mom. Me being in the situation I was like, I can't tell my mom. But unfortunately, by the time I was 13, I was pregnant by this man. I was a straight A student in school. I ran track and cross country. I sang on the school choir. And one day I was running track and I got sick and fell out. And, and everybody thought it was exhaustion. So did I. I just knew I was real sick. Well, unfortunately, by the time I was 13, almost 14, my mother had left that marriage. But our relationship was strained because this man kept coming around, because now I'm 12, 13, almost 14. He's by now 20. He's popping up. And I'm telling him, you can't be around because my mom doesn't like that. So in my mother's eyes, I was being fast. Little did I know I was being raped. And I did not realize back then that was rape. I didn't realize until I was in my 30s in college, there was a display in the courtyard or wherever we all hung out. There was a table and it was information about rape. And when I read the different definitions and I talked to the girls there, then in that moment in my 30s, I was like, I was raped and I didn't know it. I was being raped. By the time I'm 13 and a half, my mom sees that I'm pregnant and it doesn't go well for us. Because again, my mom didn't know what was going on and she fussed. My birthday is in February. And February, when I was 14, I had an abortion. I couldn't make a decision. I was a child. Nobody helped me make this decision. My mom was irate. I wasn't in touch with my dad. Because my story is long, and I'll just say that with my dad's second marriage and my mom's second marriage, both of those people kept me and my big brother away from each other and me away from my dad. because the stepfather was abusive and the stepmom, she just didn't like my dad's first kid. So we were really separated, even though I knew my dad. I had nobody to really talk to me. I mean, it was Planned Parenthood and they told me the different options that I had. And, I was scared to have an abortion because I'm like, this is an innocent kid in me that didn't ask to come here. But I'm a kid too. I am a child. How am I going to take care of a kid? And growing up in abuse, I honestly, somewhere in my little head, thought that if I have this child, I'm going to abuse it because I don't like the father. I don't know. And I was like, I don't want it. I remember telling the counselor that, and she set me up for the date. And my mom went with me in the waiting room. I started crying and I was like, Mom, I don't know what to do. And she was like, so you want it? And it wasn't comforting. And though me and my mom have a great relationship now, but during that time, it just wasn't. I wanted my mom to hold me in my arms and tell me what to do. And that did not happen. So I told her, I was like, I don't know. I'm scared. So I remember very vividly being in that room. I remember the sound. I remember the smell. I'm in my 50s now, and this happened when I was 14. I was pretty far along in the pregnancy. I was at least 4 months. So at that point, during the process, I really feel in my heart that the baby was a boy. It was painful. I just remember the pain. I remember feeling so sad and so awful for what I did, but I couldn't take it back. I didn't tell anybody. They just knew that I was out of school for a little while. I kept it a secret. I was hard on myself. Every year I calculated the age of this child until maybe I was close to 40. Now I don't calculate anymore, and I finally forgave myself. But it took years to just really embrace and say, if this child sees me and has forgiven me, God has forgiven me, and I have to forgive myself, and it's going to be okay. So that was hard. That was a hard part of me growing up. It took a long time to just find out who I was, how beautiful I was, how important I was, and to know that those things that happened were not my fault. And I suffered in silence for a long time. So in the 80s, I remember, my big brother and I were very close. We were the best of friends, 3 years apart. Eventually, my big brother came to live with us. My brother was the friendliest person. He did not know a stranger. And he had so many friends. During that time, I would be with my brother anywhere him and his friends went. But over time, there were friends who just started disappearing, meaning they just were there and then they weren't. And I know my big brother was going to a lot of funerals. A few of them I went with him. What we heard or what we were told is that this person, if it was explained how they passed, it was they had cancer. Over time, my big brother stopped me from going to these funerals. At this point, I'm 14, 15 years old. I would walk the streets of South Philly with him while he handed out pamphlets. My brother volunteered. It was an AIDS service organization. I went with my big brother where he handed out condoms, he handed out pamphlets, and he explained why he was doing that. And he talked to me about this thing called GRID, because at the time it was GRID. It was gay-related immunodeficiency. And then the word AIDS came up. And my big brother shared with me many of the friends that we were with contracted AIDS and they died. Growing up with my big brother, and I guess in the era I was in, there was not a lot of, for me and my age, there wasn't this big thing about gay. My brother had a lot of friends and they were really nice to me and we were all cool. And I had a crush on, seemed like every guy my brother hung with. So when he explained to me like AIDS and they died from AIDS, and then of course back then it's like, well, it's a gay disease. And I'm like, wait, so they were gay? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, are you kidding me? They were so fine. I loved them. And he was like, so because we're gay, we can't be fine? So it was like a lot of joking. My brother never took anything seriously. He really educated me. And then as he explained this disease that was going on for our communities, he explained, Alicia, you have to make sure whomever you're with, you need to use a condom. And for me, I was like, well, I'm only with one person. So by now, I had a new boyfriend. I had been with this guy not very long, but my brother would tell me it doesn't matter. You know what you're doing, but you don't know what they're doing. So I need you to always make sure that they, use a condom. And that's how I learned about, really sexual health. I didn't learn too much. I didn't learn any of that from my mom. So I remember at the age of 11, I sent a little boy a letter. He was across the street from my grandmother's house, and I used to love this little boy. He was so cute. And we never did anything. Like, he was on his porch, I was on mine, and I wrote him a letter just to tell him how much I liked him, and the stamp fell off. Because the stamp fell off, it came back to my house. And my mom, when she read it, she basically was like, if I find out that you're screwing around, I'm gonna kick your butt. And I'm 11, so I don't know anything about sex. I don't even know what she was talking about. So it's funny now, but back then, unfortunately, there was no conversation about sex and sexual health. And I really learned a lot from my big brother. But by the time I learned these things, I was already sexually active. I'd already had an abortion. So, I learned sexual health the really, really hard way. But even in my brother educating me, I made a decision. Well, I was always this type of person. I am with one person. I didn't jump around in different relationships. By the time I was 15, I was in a long-term relationship. After the abortion, I was in a temporary relationship with somebody I considered my high school sweetie. He was a cute guy. We loved New Edition and all the groups and sung. He was athletic, I was athletic, and then he eventually went to a different school. We just stayed close friends. But the relationship I got into at the age of 15, I stayed in until I was in for 10 years. In my pre-adult, I'll say 15 years old, was with this guy. I left home at 17 because things were just not happy for me. I started working at the age of 13, so I'd always had a job. I was in school, and in this relationship that I got into at 15, we made a decision to build a life together. And he's like, I want to marry you eventually. I want you to have my child. At 17, I'm pregnant. He and I planned to have a baby. We were living together already because I had left home. I was still going to school and working. We made a plan, let's make a baby on his birthday. After that, I did not see a cycle. No more menstrual cycle after that. I realized I was pregnant. I was extremely happy because to me, it wasn't even about him. It was, I'm going to have somebody that I can love, that's going to love me. And this time, I'm not going to let this baby go. As happy as I was, it was like I found out I was pregnant. And then I found out that the guy I'm pregnant by is a drug addict. And I'm so naive. I don't know anything about drugs and stuff. He's a drug addict. He hadn't been paying the bills, and we get evicted. And now that we're evicted, so I'm pregnant and we're homeless in Philadelphia. I got pregnant in the winter time. So it's the winter, I'm pregnant. I don't talk to my mom at this point. I can't find my dad or my big brother. So I have nobody but this guy who's a drug addict. I remember sleeping outside we were on a park bench. It was cold. It started to rain. So he walked me into a train station. We sat on a step and he covered me up with newspaper because it was cold. Here I'm 17, in school, working. He used all the money for drugs that I had saved. I'm homeless. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. So just fast forward and a long story short, I don't know how I got reconnected with my big brother, but eventually I did. And this guy who I'm pregnant by, that was a temporary situation. We were still running from place to place while I'm pregnant. Eventually I had my baby. It was the happiest day for me. I named my daughter after my little sister's middle name. So my daughter's name is Charisma. The relationship, unfortunately, did not work out, so I kind of moved on with my life. I had to leave my daughter's father alone. I got into another relationship that I was forced into by my mom, because eventually I got back with my mom because I was having a hard time as an adult now with a child. This man that my mom wanted me to be with was older at the time. I met him, I was 20. He was like 32. He had his own home, he was settled, and my mom felt like it was the best thing for me to do, but I didn't like him. I didn't want to be with him. And I felt obligated when I eventually moved in with this man, because first my mom would make jokes like, hey, when you gonna move in with him? And I'm like, Mommy, I don't want to do that. I don't like him. And over time, it just became like a push, and I felt rejected. I had low self-esteem. Well, that low self-esteem followed me into my adulthood. So here I'm feeling rejected by my mom just by different words. She may have been playing, but for me, it was, you don't want me and you don't want me around. A lot of people don't want me and people don't want me around and they mistreat me. So, okay, I'll go with this person. Well, I stayed with this person for about 3 months. I felt obligated to be intimate with him. The first time I got pregnant and I was not happy. I was really sick. I found out at the time I had tumors on my ovaries and I needed to get them removed. Right before scheduling the surgery, I had pre-op and I told them I was sick and I think I'm pregnant. They did a pregnancy test and the lady comes in like, you're pregnant. And I'm like, no, I don't want this baby. I don't want to be with him. I don't want this. She just thought I was going to be happy and I wasn't. Here, I'm pregnant again. I have tumors. The doctors are telling me, well, we need to get them out because they're kind of big. So we have options. We can take the tumors out, but you'd have to have an abortion. Or you can carry the baby and it could be the possibility that you have a miscarriage. Or it could kill you, it could kill the baby. So here I am, this young girl, I'm in my 20s, and you're telling me that I might die if I have this baby or if I don't have this baby. So, I'm another confusing situation where I have to make a decision. Well, at the time, yes, I was working. I was a barber. So I went to barber school and I, did hair, graduated in the 90s after I finished high school. I'm doing hair, but I'm pregnant. And of course, getting sick. And I was a liability at the shop that I worked at because of the chemicals from the perms and all those other things. So just kind of moving forward, I did not stay with this person that got me pregnant. I wanted to leave. This person was very dominant, very controlling. He never raised his voice. He did not use foul language. It was like he was very subtle with everything that he did. So first it was, oh, I don't want you to go shopping. I'm going to take you out to eat. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner, we went out to eat. I didn't shop. And at the time I was on welfare, so I had food stamps and they just kind of piled up. Everything that I wanted to do, he was there. He took me where I needed to go. Not that I asked, he said he would. And then I found it very controlling. I'm like, I want to be with my friends. I want to be with my family. Well, you don't want to be with me? And I'm like, I just want to go hang out with my friends. It was always him trying to keep me in the house. And one day an argument came about because I was sick. And I wanted to go get my hair done because I couldn't do it. I was just really sick with this pregnancy. He locked me in the house and told me I couldn't leave. And if I left, he would kill me. So I called my mom and I'm like, Mom, come and get me because this crazy boop, boop, boop is trying to keep me in the house. And at this time in my 20s, I was this very angry. I was an angry person and I didn't take mess from anybody. I was nice to other people, but I just wouldn't let people walk over me anymore. I was tired. But my mom came and got me. I didn't stay with that man. I lived with my mom. He stalked me the entire pregnancy. Eventually, I moved out of state. So I left Philadelphia because this person stalked me. I was not afraid of them, but I already had a toddler. I had my daughter. And here I am pregnant with another child. And this child made me sick. I was extremely sick with him. I spent at least 4 months in the hospital while carrying him. And by the time I got out, less than a month later, I gave birth to him. And then I want to say probably by the time he was 2 months rather, I moved from Philadelphia. His father told me that he wanted to see him, and if he was his child, if he's his child, and I don't be with him, he'll take the baby from me and nobody will see me again. I was like, okay, sure, come and see your baby Saturday at 8:00. That Friday at 8:00, I moved out of state and didn't turn back. it was just a lot of turmoil in my 20s. I raised my children by myself. I eventually moved from Philadelphia to Virginia, then to North Carolina. I came to North Carolina to be with my dad. My dad and I were close but couldn't be together because of other people. So I said when I was a kid, when I get older, I'm going to be with my dad. So that's why I live in North Carolina, because I wanted to be with my father. But I raised my children in Carolina, made a decision that I'm going to wait till I get married, and I'm not going to date anymore because dating was horrible and I didn't want my children. So my children didn't see guys come around. It was just me and them. I went to work, I went to school. So by then I had enrolled in college to further my education, to do better as a single parent. And my prayer was by the time I'm 30, I'll be married. So I ran into my old high school sweetie, this guy that I wasn't with for a long time. We loved New Edition and we sang and we were both athletic. We rekindled. He moves to North Carolina. We talk about our religious beliefs because I wanted somebody to believe the same way that I did. He agreed that he did. I also wanted to be sure that he had gotten tested. Because of my brother's teaching, I got tested all the time. Once testing for STDs and STIs were available, I got tested all the time. Give me everything. I want to make sure, and we use the ignorant language that we don't use now, but I said, make sure I'm clean. And that was the language that we used back then. But I wanted to be sure that I did not have any type of STDs, and I didn't. When I talked to this person, they said that they didn't. They had been tested possibly a year ago, and this was back in 2001. This person moved in with me and my children, left Philadelphia, moved in with me and my kids, proposed very quickly. He wanted to get married at the Justice of Peace, like right then and there. Based on his upbringing and mine, we didn't want to really live together without doing that. But unfortunately, we just went a different route. Within a month, I got sick with a cold, which I thought was the flu. The doctor told me it was the flu, but I lost 20 pounds. I was sick for a long time. I thought I had lymphoma cancer. So just pushing forward, I scheduled an appointment for a referral for a biopsy. But when I went to the clinic, normally when I would go to the clinic for any of my sexual health tests, I never went back for test results because they were always negative. So I didn't go back for the last one, but I went and they thought I was there to collect test results. So when I got there, and I'm really waiting for a doctor to complete a form for a referral, this nurse comes in, she opens a folder, pushes it in front of me, and it says HIV positive. I'm 2 months from my wedding. So this was December 13th, 2001, 10 a.m. And I was scheduled to get married February 22nd, 2002. So 2 months before my wedding, I found out I'm HIV positive. I'm distraught, not knowing how long I've had it, who I contracted it from. I could count on my hands how many people I was with without condoms. I really just assumed I contracted it from my daughter's father because of his lifestyle, the length of time we were together. But come to find out, it was my fiance. Once my fiance got tested, which was by the time he got his results, it was in January, I just assumed I passed this virus to him. I was heartbroken, didn't really want to get married. He said yes, let's still get married. When you have this feeling, everybody who's listening, when you have this gut feeling, this something told me, this discerning spirit, when you feel in your gut something is not right, you need to pay attention to it. It is so serious. And I had that feeling, was like, Alicia, you need to look at his labs, his paperwork. So I asked him, once he got diagnosed, what was your CD4 and viral load? How much virus do you have? CD4, how strong is your T cell? And he said, 5 something, because they were telling us in the 90s and 2000s that as long as your CD4 is 500 and above, you're in a quote unquote normal range. Now, when I got diagnosed, mine was about 740 or 60 or something like that. They couldn't give me a viral load. There was no U equals U language. So there was no undetectable and, equals untransmittable. For his, so I went with my gut. That gut said, look at that paperwork. The CD4 was 150 and the viral load was too many numbers for me to count. I'm a month before I get married. That 1 has got to be a 7 and it's a typo maybe. No, he could not have known. No, I met him when I was 14. There's no way that he would have done this and knew. Maybe he didn't know. So fast forward and we still get married. And people say, well, why did you marry him? Number 1, I didn't know it was him. I thought I passed the virus to him. Even after seeing the documents showing that he already had an AIDS diagnosis, I felt like, who's going to want to be with me? Nobody's going to want, again, rejection. Nobody's going to want the HIV girl. Nobody's going to want the nasty girl. The girl who has an STD that you can't get rid of. Nobody's going to want me. If he does, I'll just stay with him. We'll take care of each other. We'll die together, whatever. So I stayed with him. And I always laugh and I say for 2.5 seconds. And I say that because even after the wedding, before the wedding, after the wedding, I'm asking, like, how do you think you contracted this? Because by now we've had a conversation. We argued. Because I grew up in domestic violence and arguing and fighting, I didn't want my children to be around that. So my children were never around when this occurred. But we would argue about it. One day I'm coming home from work really late. We get into this argument because of me working late and he's intoxicated. So not only did I marry into HIV, I married yet another person who's on drugs, and I did not know that, and an alcoholic. So I didn't know any of these things. Y'all, make sure you know who you are having relations with. It's so important. Just don't get with people because of tingly feelings. But in this argument, this individual accuses me of messing around, and I'm like, I'm married, I wouldn't do that, and I got this virus that I got from you. And he's like, yeah, so what? I'm like, what do you mean, so what? Are you saying that you knew that you had HIV and you gave it to me anyway? Yeah, so what? What are you going to do about it? So that took a whole turn for me. The thoughts in my head were, so I tell people jokingly, I have 3 personalities or 3 people that live in my head. All of them are named Alicia. You got the very timid Alicia who grew up in all that trauma. You've got the Alicia that has her head on straight. She can think logically. Then you have what I call Philly. Philly is the one that will knock you out and you have no idea that you're hit until you wake up. All of them were talking at the same time, and it's like, kill him. No, you're going to go to jail. You're going to lose your kids. And I'm just like, I just don't believe this. So honestly, y'all know I didn't kill this man because you hear my voice right now. But it was traumatic. So my 20s, my 30s were very traumatic for me. My childhood was traumatic. I was so sad all the time. I was so broken all the time. I eventually divorced this individual. And I know the questions are, hey, what about the legal ramifications of what happened? I didn't have a leg to stand on, y'all. It's just what it is. And I did my investigating and tried to do what I could to see if I can get him prosecuted. But it just didn't work out in my favor. Long story short, I had no legal leg to stand on. So for me, I was going to kill him. I was just like, okay, it's my job. Let me take him out so he won't do this to anybody else. That didn't work out. I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful that I didn't go that route because I got him out of my life. I eventually told my children. I eventually told my family. I got support from other people like me. I told my children about my diagnosis 3 years into my diagnosis. So I got diagnosed at the age of 29. So I was 32 when I told my children. They were distraught, not that they didn't understand HIV or didn't know it, because I taught my children very early. It was different for me, so I wanted it better for them. So I taught them early, and my daughter, I remember her response. My son, he's 3 years younger than she is, and he's sitting there with clenched fists and red in the face, and my daughter's like, but how, Mommy? How did this happen? I mean, I know it happens with sex, but how? Because you don't have a boyfriend, you only go to work and you only go to school, and there's only the 3 of us. How did this happen? So when I tell her who, it broke my children. Because in that short time I was married, when I wasn't around, he was mean to my kids. He was verbally abusive to my kids. raising my children, because I didn't have a voice as a kid, I told them, when you have things on your mind or you want to talk and you don't feel like you can talk to anybody, you write it. So my kids always had journals, and my daughter would write. And one time he found it and he beat my daughter because she wrote about him. And that was right before I got him out of my house. So just the maltreatment that my children endured for him was like, wow, I hate him. And from that day, even though me and my children built this very close relationship, they didn't shun me, they loved on me, it disrupted my children's life. They are adults now. My daughter will be 35 and my son is going on 31. My children's life has been interrupted as a result of my decisions, but we continue to build that relationship. Through the 20s and 30s, like I said, I was really broken because of traumatic situations. But over time, connecting with other people living with HIV, they became my rock. They became my support. They became the wind beneath my wings. They became those people who said, it's okay, you're not by yourself. They were the ones who taught me that even though their lifestyle may be different than mine, their upbringing, their traumas may be different, we're still the same. We're still family. We're still brothers and sisters. My big brother, I told him on my wedding day. So when I got married, nobody in my family could come to my wedding. Of course, my dad was there because it happened here in North Carolina. And my big brother told me he couldn't come. So sneaky, he lied. This part makes me cry. It's so beautiful. I walk out to walk down this makeshift aisle that we created at a recreation center, which is where I got married. And my big brother is there. My big brother is there. He could sing the socks off of your feet. My brother was a singer. I come from a family of musicians and singers. And my brother sang at my wedding so beautifully. He sang, and I told him later on. He just embraced me, but my brother tells me after the fact, like, I don't know, maybe a year or so later, that he was positive as well. My brother, which I know, he was diagnosed maybe when I was like 15 or 16 years old, which is why he was educating me and explaining to me everything that was going on with this AIDS epidemic. My brother was 3 years older than me, so I don't know his age when he was diagnosed. I'm assuming, because I saw a lot of things. When I say I saw a lot of things, symptoms, and also every boyfriend my brother had when I was like 16, 17 years old had an AIDS diagnosis already. So all of his boyfriends already had AIDS and died. So he would get into these relationships and everyone would be diagnosed. So I had an assumption that my brother could have been diagnosed when I was like 15, which would have made him 18. Or it could have been 17 when he was diagnosed. I am thinking it was after he came from the military. So he went to the Marines for a little while after high school. When I told him about me, then he told me about him. We were really close, like I said, but my brother was more silent than I was. I felt the need to be outspoken. I felt the need to tell my story to help other people. And I do understand why my brother didn't do that, but he was my biggest supporter. Every time I came around to visit him, he lived in a community of people living with HIV. There were apartment complexes for us. Every time I would come around, people were like, "That's your sister? Alicia is your sister?" He's like, "Yeah, this is my sister, and she is the best, and she's awesome." And he would always say all these wonderful things, but he was so proud of me. And so many people knew me in the community because I was outspoken. I educated and told my story or what have you. But our relationship did not change. It wasn't strained at all. As a matter of fact, as I grew in my advocacy and just started to do a lot of different things, my brother's health deteriorated. He already had hepatitis. And before there were like good medications cured, my brother's was already far gone. It turned into liver disease, then liver cancer. So I had the privilege, it is such a privilege to be able to take care of my big brother before he passed in 2015. He was undetectable, his HIV was controlled, but he developed cancer. He lost his fight, but he continued to fight and support me. And while he was sick and his life was deteriorating, I was working on a PhD and taking care of my big brother and working a full-time job. And yes, it was exhausting, but it was the best thing that I can do. And I was also writing my memoir, Standing on My Healing from Tainted to Chosen. The day that I finished writing that last page of my memoir, I said, I'm going to read this to my brother. I finished on a Sunday, and I hand wrote my book because God told me when I finish writing this book, I will have processed through some healing so that I can move to the next chapter of my life. I wrote the last page and I felt this relief, and I'm like, I'm going to read it to T tomorrow. His name was Terrence. We called him TJ, but family called him T, and family calls me Lee. So it was like T and Lee. I finished this book on a Sunday, and my crazy brother dies that Monday. And I laugh about it because I say my brother was a jokester. While I was caring for him, it just really got extreme. And because he was deteriorating so much, we felt that it was best that he go back into a facility. But he already told us he wanted to die at home. And when we were talking about it, we had an appointment that day, that Monday at 2:00 to talk about which facility he would go to. My brother passed at 1:30. With my brother's passing, though, that tore a hole in my heart, and I still have an emptiness there, but I feel so happy because I got to be with him. We were very close. He taught me, and I took the pearls of wisdom that he gave to me and I shared it with other people. And I learned more and more on top of that to help as many as I could and continue to help as many as I can, not just with my story, but the things that I've learned to try to help people to get resources, to really live and know that this thing is not a death sentence like it was years ago, that we are living and we're thriving, and you can be beautiful like I am, if not beautifuler. It was the 4th year of my diagnosis that I started to speak out. I wanted my children to know before I did anything. I actually spoke to a congresswoman in the area that I lived with because it was like I was feeling that feeling. I need to tell somebody. So I told this congresswoman my story at a parent community meeting, and she connected me with another woman who's my mentor. I love her so much, Diane Robinson. She never reminds me saying her name in public, through Piedmont Health Services and Sickle Cell Agency in Greensboro, North Carolina. They did trainings for people living with and impacted by HIV to be community street storytellers and educators. I first started speaking at A&T State University here in North Carolina. Over the years, I did a lot of work like that and worked with a local organization called North Carolina AIDS Action Network, who does a lot of policy and resources through the state of North Carolina. I was a board member there, and after my time was finished with them, the board chair asked if it was okay to give my name to Pacha. And I was like, sure, that'll be fine. What's Pacha? Because I had not heard of Pacha before. It's like the Presidential Advisory Council on HIV/AIDS. And I'm like, what? I was really excited. And I was like, this is a heavy lift. He said, you can represent North Carolina. I become a part of Pacha. And in the beginning, I'm nervous because I'm like, these people are amazing. They are smart. They are really into this policy, stream. And for me, I had not tapped into policy like that. So I didn't know what I could bring. And over time, it just became a wonderful family. I learned a lot. I learned how to really kind of expand my thinking with HIV outside of just a local or a state thinking and teaching and educating, but federal. I remember when I really started talking in some of the meetings, it was like, okay, well, what other things that we might be missing? And I thought about, okay, well, we have our dandelions, or, people who were born with HIV or diagnosed at a younger age. And then we have like Black women. I don't hear a lot of conversation about Black women. And then, of course, the name cisgender came about. So I'm like, okay, Black cisgender women. And I was like, and HIV and aging. Because I'm like, I'm aging, but I didn't really see aging like that, because I think we have a misconception of aging. It's like you see people who may be in their 80s, 70s, 80s and up, and it's like, okay, they're old, they're aging, but we're all aging every day. Working with Pacha and being able to be one of the first co-chairs for our HIV and aging, lifetime and long-term survivors, it's just epic to me. It's such an honor to have been able to sit in a space with so many amazing leaders from all over and learn about what we can do on a federal level to make changes for the people living with and impacted by HIV. And for me, being now on the aging side, being over 50, I learned so much that I didn't think about. Being aging and aging out of work, retiring, and what that's going to look like when it comes to Social Security benefits, retirement. So I just wasn't sure, and I learned a lot just being a part of Pacha and being able to, like I said, really learn what we can do as a collective to create resolutions and make changes. Medications for me. I was a non-progressor for 10 years. My immune system was so good. My viral load stayed really, really low. And understand that there was still a lot of learning for scientists when it came to medication, HIV, viral load, CD4. But my viral load continued to stay low. My CD4, though, was anywhere between 750 and 1200 by itself without medication. Being a non-progressor, my doctors wanted to do test, of course. And, there was the stigma and rejection of science and research from, things that I learned coming up, being a Black woman and historical traumas and things like that. So I'm like, well, they're taking blood anyway to take my CD4 and viral load. Let them take it. It doesn't matter. So that didn't bother me. I will say, like I said, I was a non-progressor for 10 years where my immune system was fighting off the virus. But then in the 11th year, a lot of stuff started happening. People that I was close to were dying. I went into depression. A lot of stuff happened, and my CD4 number started to drop. And I was concerned because I was a quote unquote numbers watcher, and I wanted to make sure I was healthy. The doctors always said, well, your CD4 is definitely above 500, so you don't need medication, because during that time, it was not treatment as prevention like we have now. It wasn't getting to care immediately. So I did my own research and told my doctor I would like to think about taking medication, because at this point, my CD4 was getting to close to 200, and under 200 and below is an AIDS diagnosis. And I did not want an AIDS diagnosis. I was just afraid, like, what is my immune system going to do if I have that? So long story short, I did start medication, which was the scariest thing to me in my life. I knew that when I take this pill, this is for the rest of my life. I started with Atripla, which is a 1 pill a day. My concern was being sick, having side effects, because at this point I'm working on my PhD. I'm like, I'm up at night doing papers and doing all of this stuff. Like, I can't be sick from medication. What is this going to do to my body long term? So side effects that I developed the first time, or I experienced, I stayed up too late. I would take the pills at night so I can just go to sleep and don't feel anything. But I stayed up late doing a paper, and I was sitting there typing this paper, and I felt really dizzy. I started to get flushed, like if people have hot flashes, like the heat was just turning up. And I felt like, honestly, I used to drink alcohol, and I felt drunk. Like I had drank so much alcohol, and I was like, why am I feeling this sick? I got up and I was dizzy. and I was kind of wobbling. I lived in an apartment, so from the living room through the hallway, I turned on the AC because I felt like if I get cool, I'll feel better, because I felt nauseous too. And I just got into bed, clothes and everything, didn't turn out lights. I woke up the next morning. I kind of felt groggy. So this happened for 2 days. After that, no more side effects. I knew that it was a side effect from the medication. I stayed on Atripla probably 6 or 7 years. And then I moved over to Triomec because I wanted to try something different that was less harsh on my organs. Triomec I did well with. During that time, we're hearing about Cabenuva, the every other month shot. And I'm like, ooh, I can't wait to get that. That way I don't have to take pills. Even though I took my pills every day, I did not miss. I was like, we get pill fatigue, you get tired of that. So maybe a shot, but do I want to go to the doctors every other month? Let's try it. So I stepped out and I tried Cabenuva and I loved it. I had such a freedom. Like, even though I didn't miss my pills, it was like one less thing to worry about. Obviously, I must have had it already, but I've been diagnosed with pulmonary sarcoidosis. So I have to take an inhaler. The inhaler that I had is no longer covered thanks to these new changes, these political changes and, etc. So I have a new inhaler that's more compatible. It wasn't compatible with my current meds, so I had to try Delstrigo. So I'm really happy that that's working out for me. So through my journey of, being a person living with HIV, I've always educated myself. So I have a bachelor's in social work, I have a master's in public health, and I finished all of my courses for a PhD in public health as well. When I think about this political climate, I will say that it angers me and it makes me nervous for myself and my siblings. But I think more than ever, it is time for us to unify and to continue to stand up for the things that we believe in and the things that we need to continue to thrive, not just with HIV, but life period. Because our political climate, the things that are happening now are impacting everyone across the board. Keep our eyes open and keep our feet on the ground so that we can continue to work together to make change for the better.
Thank you for listening to Confessions, HIV Positive Women. This season, we've explored the journeys of women aging with HIV, proving that health, resilience, and joy are possible at every stage of life. If these stories resonated with you, share them with someone who needs to hear them. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and stay connected for more conversations about HIV. Until next time, take small steps towards improving your health, one step at a time, one day at a time, and always find your joy.